we're going to have a shortfall of over 10 Edmontons. It's completely unrealistic. Canada has the lowest number of housing per 1,000 units of any G7 country. I think it all points in the same direction. I just don't think this policy is the right one. In one article that will say it's an impending recession, and then you'll read two articles that say the exact opposite thing. So I'm going to cover some of the stuff today. Today, I'm going to do an episode on the market, things I'm seeing in the news, some of the stuff that I'm seeing coming through the market. I always think back to when I started in real estate, and I would look back at the previous recession and think, if only I could have been in a place to take advantage of it, I would have been able to see all the signs and would have created a bunch of wealth. A lot of wealth is created in recessions. When the market tanks, you can buy stuff cheap. And I always thought if I was in that position, I would have been ready and taken advantage. Now I'm in a place where I consume a lot of information, and I find it increasingly hard to decipher that and tell what's going on. You'll read one article that will say it's an impending recession and the market's going to crash or we're in a huge housing bubble. And then you'll read two articles that say the exact opposite thing. And I don't think there is any economist out there that knows. No one has a crystal ball. So I always try to take as much information in as I can and then decipher what's, tangible, what's usable, and then pair that with what's going on in the market. So I'm going to cover some of the stuff today. The first thing, and it's not really news, but I was going through the last CMHC report, and they have three different scenarios. And in their high population growth scenario, which really all that does is takes into account if we keep current immigration levels until 2030, what that will look like. And it says the high growth scenario considers what would happen to the supply gap if current immigration levels were extended to 2030. In this case, the supply gap would increase to 4 million housing units. Now, obviously that number is huge, and I think it's hard to really understand how big it is until you put it into perspective. So Edmonton right now has 387,000 dwellings in the entire city. So in the next 7 years, if immigration stays where it is today, we're going to have a shortfall of over 10 Edmontons. So we would have to build 10 new cities the size of Edmonton in the next 7 years in order to meet the supply shortfall. Completely unrealistic. We've never been able to increase housing very much in this country. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the supplies. You'd have a hard time getting the land serviced. It's completely unrealistic. Currently, we build about 286,000 units a year. We would have to build those 286,000 plus another 571,000 just to meet that supply gap. To me, it's very clear we're already massively short on housing, and it's going to get a lot worse in the next couple of years. Our government seems very set on keeping immigration levels where they're at, our current government. And so if we keep them there, I don't see how we get out of this. We can increase housing some. You seen the government come out the other day, they got rid of GST as long as you're putting a certain amount of your units in affordable. That's an incentive, and maybe I'm not a builder, so I can't speak for them, but is it a big enough incentive to save 5% of the build cost and then hamstring your rents for the next 10 or 20 years? Hard to think that it is, in my opinion. You look at some cities are seeing double-digit rent increases year over year right now, and you're going to give up a lot of that just to save 5% on the initial cost. It doesn't seem like it's enough to me. I don't have the solution. We have to allow people to build very quickly, and I don't know what that looks like. You still do have to have, rules and stuff in place. So everything I read, it looks like we're heading for a supply shortage to get a lot worse. Edmonton is projected to go down to under 2% vacancy in the next year and a bit. When I first moved to the city in 2020, we were at 7. Now I think we're around 3, and it's supposed to go to 1.8. And the difference between 7 and 3 is it's hard to even explain. Like we were reevaluating rents every quarter. When we were at 7%, we were offering big discounts if you did 2-year leases because we were trying to keep the buildings full, and we were trying to stay around that 5% vacancy was kind of the target. Now every every week or two where we're doing market analysis, and rents in the areas are going up like literally week over week. So when new units come up, we're raising rents. We have nothing available, very little. When we do have stuff available, we're getting tons and tons of calls. And so we're finally starting to see the growth that a lot of other cities have seen, which is good. The flip side of that is you're starting to see things in Calgary. You'll see articles, and it'll be here too, but or people are calling for rent control and all these things. And it is always a little funny to me when people in a city like Calgary or Edmonton want rent control, because they're still so much more affordable than almost everywhere else in Canada. So in Alberta, we spend about 30% of our income on housing. In Vancouver, for instance, you would spend 70%. So there's still such a gap there and it's still, we have a huge affordability advantage. Putting rent control in would just stifle development and make the situation worse. But obviously I can see when people are getting their rents increased very rapidly, they want some safety there. The one thing policy-wise that I think is coming through, we've seen a bit of this and it's still kind of unclear because it seems like some people are getting treated different than others, but CMHC is trying to get rid of rent evictions. So where you buy a building, go and renovate it and get the rents up. Now there are some landlords that do that very badly and they do just kick people out and get rents up a lot. A lot of people that do that though are taking a product that hasn't been touched in 40 or 60 years and is almost unlivable and turning it into something that most of the market wants to rent. So if you buy an old building that has, let's say $800 rents and you go and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fixing it up and now you can get $1,200 or $1,300 rents, it makes sense from a business perspective, but also the majority of the market wants that unit. Whereas before, when it was a slum, very few people wanted it. I think they're trying to get rid of that for a couple of reasons. One is that drastically, when you're taking units out of this really low income and moving them into a higher bracket, that is increasing the overall rents in a city and it's making it look like rents are going up, and they're trying to stop that. So they're doing things like CMHC isn't going to be paying VTBs out with refinances. It looks like they're really cracking down on hard money. So bridge loans have to be approved lenders and possibly have to be principal and interest for 24 months before they'll pay it out. That's going to drastically change the market because a huge portion of people's business model is going in with bridge loans, fixing the buildings up, and then refinancing out with CMHC. Right now, with where interest rates are at, you pretty much have to have CMHC debt on a property in order for the numbers to make sense. So usually you can do that at the end. You get the rents up and you can have a nice stable investment at the end. You also have a building that people actually want to rent. Most of those CMHC loans at the end of them do have some kind of affordability tied into them anyways. So I think it's a good win-win program. CMHC has their own program where you would use their money to do the renovations and stuff, and maybe that's a reason they're cracking down on this, is to get more people into that program. I'm sure they'll make a lot more fees on it. But for the time being, I think there'll be some people that are in trouble because you've already started this program and maybe you took a VTB. Like, guys, just to get loans done, we're taking VTBs and maybe assuming the debt that was on it because CMHC was so backed up. So you would do the whole program. You take a VTB, the owner was fine with it because he was going to get paid out in 6 months or a year. And now if they're going to stop paying those out, that will cause some problems in the industry. And I think we'll do the exact opposite of what they're wanting. The big reason being all these units that were coming into the market and people actually wanted to rent won't. And a lot of these old buildings, it has just been an old person that owned it and just kept it as is. And people don't want to rent something from 1960. That's, there's all these problems with it. So that's something that when you read the shortfall and then you see CMHC trying to put in certain policies to kind of dictate that, I think it all points in the same direction. I just don't think this policy is the right one. So anytime I post something about housing or high housing costs in Canada, rents being high, I'll get little comments that people say, this isn't just Canadian, this isn't the government's fault, this is, worldwide. And I'm sure there's housing problems everywhere. But just to give you an example of where we rank, the OECD ranks Canada as having the most expensive housing market among all G7 countries. So we're obviously the worst there. It finds that Canada has the lowest number of housing per 1,000 units of any G7 country. Estimates it would take 1.8 million additional housing units just to reach the average G7 country. There's another article that kind of ties in. It says household debt in Canada now highest among any G7 country. The amount owed by Canadian households is higher than the country's entire GDP. CMHC said high home prices are to blame for the ballooning debt. Household debt in the US and UK by comparison have shrunk over the last 10 years. So because home prices are so expensive, now debt's going up. We have the highest debt of any of our peers. And some of it is tied, I mean, it's not all the government to blame by any means, but our immigration policy is very aggressive compared to most other countries. Canada's population has grown at twice the pace of other G7 countries from 2016 to 2021. And that's pretty much all immigration. It's not that our fertility rate is that much higher. And I'm all for immigration. We need people, new people in the country, need people to work jobs, but we have to have a plan of where are all these people going to live, where are the people that are already here going to live. If we're not building houses at the same rate that we're bringing people in and we're already undersupplied on housing, it just isn't a great plan. Where's the healthcare plan that's going to be able to support 500,000 extra people a year? Like, I don't see the government having any plan except just getting people here. So hopefully that gets sorted out. That's one thing that definitely is going to drive the housing crisis. And then another article that I read that I thought was really interesting, and I really liked it. In BC, they are looking at setting up their own housing fund, and it's going to be for middle class people. So you always hear about low income housing. The reality is a lot of people, or affordable housing, but a lot of people won't live in those buildings. The middle class needs help as well. And so I think it's a great plan to start building to help people build middle class housing, not just affordable housing. So I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. A lot of affordable housing buildings are built differently. They're built very, very cheap because the intent is that they have to keep rent so low. And for families and stuff, those don't always work. So I think being able to build that middle class housing, which is the vast majority of the population, is a great plan. So hopefully that works out in BC. Anyways, that's the episode for today. Just kind of gives you a snapshot of the things I've been reading about housing, immigration, things like that. If you guys can like, share, subscribe, that all helps a lot. Reach out. I've met a lot of really cool people just through social media and the podcast. They'll reach out. We'll go for meetings, things like that. It's a cool little community. I love meeting new people. So if you're interested, just send me a DM. I'm most active on Instagram. And we'll see you guys next week.